Hi everybody, this is Dr. Schroeder with this week's video introduction to week number 2 in our class on evidence-based practice. You're off to a pretty good start. Your primary task this week was to identify a problem in nursing care or nursing practice and to identify a potential new evidence-based practice intervention that you think might help with that particular practice issue, whatever it may be. And then to develop a PICO statement, which is just a clearly written, concise statement where you identify the population that you're identifying for your particular problem, a intervention that you would want to implement, a comparison intervention, which is where you would have that whatever it is that you're using to compare one thing to another. That's what your comparison intervention would be. Usually your comparison intervention ends up being what your current practice is, with your intervention being that measurement point that you're going to see, did you see any gains from that new practice? And then the outcome. And what is the outcome? Outcomes need to be measurable, specific, and something that you can actually observe and measure. And then the time frame, which is the period of time that you're going to give yourself to see, was this intervention, did it work? Does it take 3 months or 6 months to implement this procedure or this new practice in an organization? And how long does it take to work? And I give feedback to everybody in the class. You have feedback in each one of your discussion forums on your PICO. And so please review my feedback, and if you're having trouble with it, or if you're having trouble with the wording, go back and review some of the other discussion forums as well, because I've left many of you feedback, some of it similar, but you'll get the idea if you go through and if you review all my feedback, you'll get an idea for the idea of how these things should be worded. The most important thing is to have it be a clear and concise statement, something that is not vague and something that is actually measurable in some way. As we move forward, you'll need to clarify your terms a little bit. Many of you have selected an intervention providing education, but education can mean many things. It can be provided in many ways, and so as we move forward, you will want to revise your PICOs a little bit to identify more specifically what kind of, for example, what kind of education program do you plan on using? And it's important to come up with a good, well-written, clear PICO statement, because this is really the foundation for your evidence-based practice Part 1 and Part 2 papers that you're going to be completing in the coming weeks. And in fact, everything we do in the discussion questions is essentially going to get transposed from or translated from your discussion questions into your paper. So, be aware of that. And going through and reviewing the rubrics and reviewing the paper assignments will help you with these discussion questions. So that brings us to week number 2, and this week we are going to be reviewing the process of identifying and finding information. And that's really the heart of what we're doing here in evidence-based practice. Going through, finding studies and research that has been helpful in the past or has helped other hospitals and other people have found to be new interventions that really show good promise or good outcomes, and then supporting your idea and being able to support that what you are doing is in fact evidence-based. And so to do that, we have to identify keyword terms, and you're going to be identifying a total of, well, really at least 16 keyword terms. One term to correspond with each of your 4 components: the population, the intervention, comparison, and outcome, and then an additional additional 4 alternative terms that you would need to use as well, that you want to use. It's important to use different terms because different researchers will use different terminology, and you want to make sure that you're using terms that are general enough that you're not going to exclude a lot of studies that you wouldn't find otherwise, but specific enough where they're going to be honed in on your particular problem. Ultimately, when you do a search, you want to come up with a good search. A good search is somewhere between 25 to 50 and maybe 100 articles. If you get any more than that, it's questions that you're going to have a lot of research studies to muddle through that aren't really going to pertain to your topic. If it's any fewer than that, you're probably eliminating a lot of really good studies out there. And if you can only find 2 or 3 studies that demonstrate that something is evidence-based, then it's probably not really evidence-based yet. There's just not enough research to show that. So you're looking to get, between 25 and 50, up to maybe 100 articles in each one of your searches. So that's your task for the week and your discussion question. You also have one more paper that's due, which is your experiential report. This is something that students really find useful, that you're going to call or have an interview with a librarian. And it can be either a librarian at a school library or the hospital library. And you're going to answer the questions and specifically get feedback on how to search their professional databases and using what we call Boolean phrase terminology or Boolean search strategies to help find articles. Most students find this very helpful. I can tell you from personal experience that the librarian, especially librarians that work in like university libraries or hospitals, they are magicians at finding things. These are the experts in doing these keyword searches. So if you're having trouble or if you have any challenges, contact your librarian, and they can really help you with that. So that's where we're at this week. As I said, please review all my feedback this week. As you need to make changes to your PICO, go ahead and do that for your week number 2. As you have any questions, as always, feel free to post them in the discussion board. The most common feedback I gave this week was to make sure that your outcomes are measurable. In other words, don't just say that you're looking for an effect of something. How does one thing compared with another thing affect an outcome? Specifically, what kind of effect? Do you mean an increase in, a decrease of? Specifically, what are you going to measure and what measurement do you expect to see? Because that's going to form the basis for your evidence-based practice part 2 especially. But also you're going to be reflecting on that in part 1 as well. So you need to start thinking of these things at this point in the process. So I look forward to participating in class with you. As you have questions, feel free to post them, and I'll see you in the discussion boards.